Hey guys, my name is Alicia and welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be talking about the books I want to read in May. So these are just some kind of fun fantasy and like other types of books that I want to get to this month, as well as I want to participate in the Asian Readathon. So this is a readathon hosted by Cindy. Her YouTube channel is Read with Cindy. And if you haven't seen her videos, I mean, she's really popular, so I'm sure a lot of people have heard of her. But I just love her kind of energy. I love her commentary and her reviews. Like, she's super funny, and I think she has a lot of important things to say. And I also just feel like this is a great readathon to kind of help diversify your reading. I personally try to kind of read a lot of Asian authors, a lot of Black authors, just a lot of own voices stories. So I do think that this readathon will kind of help to read books that I might not have picked up otherwise, or you know how you tend to maybe read more popular books. So this is a good way to, yeah, just kind of diversify your reading. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the first book that I want to try to read this month is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. So this is a pretty popular book. I think it came out last year and it won some awards, so a lot of people have great things to say about it. And I definitely think this will be a book that I will enjoy. I think I've heard that the writing style is very kind of like whimsical and beautiful, so I love that. I also think the concept of this book is really cool. So basically it's about a, a woman who is having a really hard time. I think she's like depressed and stuff, and she ends up trying to commit suicide. And when she does, she ends up in this place called the Midnight Library, which is a place kind of between like living and death. And so when she arrives at the library, she sort of comes to terms with her life and her regrets, and she's able to kind of go through all the different lives she could have had if she had made different choices. And so I think that whole concept is just really interesting and really fascinating, and I feel like this book is going to be really kind of like make you think a lot. Like, it's going to be really thought-provoking. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to reading this one. So the next book that I have is Harrow the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. So this is the second book in the series, The Locked Tomb. The first book was Gideon the Ninth, and I believe I read that last month, and it very quickly kind of became one of my favorite books. I had just had so much fun reading that book. It was surprisingly like very funny, very exciting, very fast-paced. I really loved it. And so I right away went and bought the second book, and I'm really excited to get into this one. But basically, a quick synopsis of the first book is it takes place in kind of outer space, and it deals with these necromancers who are, there's I believe 12 different planets, and each planet has the kind of a royal family. And so the heirs of each family are called upon by the emperor to come and face a trial to be this like immortal servant. So whoever wins the trial will become the immortal kind of servant for the emperor. So our main character, Gideon, she is technically I believe it was called a cavalier, but she ends up being kind of a bodyguard to the royal heir of her planet. But she is she completely hates the heir, whose name is Harrow, and they don't get along. Since childhood, been like nemesis. They've been like they hated each other since childhood, basically. And there's a lot of like funny banter, and just Gideon as a character was such a fun perspective to read from. That book actually ended on a really big cliffhanger, so I'm super excited to find out what happened next. And as the title suggests, Harrow the Ninth, I think this book is going to be more from Harrow's perspective, and I also loved her as a character. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this book. The next book that I have is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. So this is the author of Gods of Jade and Shadow, which is one of my favorite books ever. I absolutely love that book, and this is another book that I'm really excited to read. This is basically a kind of like a very dark gothic, like haunted mansion type of feel, and it takes place in Mexico, so that's really cool. and it's about this woman whose cousin calls her after being like newly married to the mansion that she's living in because some weird stuff is happening. So the main character, whose name is Naomi, so she comes to the mansion to kind of help her cousin figure out what's going on, and there's a lot of like weird stuff happening. Yeah, and it just seems like a really cool Gothic vibe that I think will be really fun to read about. And then the last book in kind of my general TBR is Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. So this is another kind of South American setting. I believe it takes place in the kind of pre-Columbian era. Yeah, the pre-Columbian Americas. So it has to do with kind of mythology, and it's a fantasy series. I really don't know much about this book. I've heard a lot of great things. It did come out last year, and I think it's a debut novel, so yeah, I'm super excited to see kind of what direction this author takes this story, her writing style, all of those things. And like I said, I have heard some great things about it, so I'm super excited to see if it kind of lives up to that hype. So now moving on to the Asian Readathon. So there is, I believe, 4 challenges in this readathon, and then I've personally picked one book for each challenge, but you can kind of mix and match. You can kind of use one book for 2 challenges. You can kind of just play around with this readathon however you want. The main goal obviously is just to read books by Asian authors and own voices stories. And so the first challenge is to read a book by an Asian author. This is a pretty simple, kind of straightforward challenge, and so I decided to read We Hunt the Flame by Hafsa Faizal. This is a book that I've been really looking forward to reading, and I've just heard so many great things about it, and as like the sequel's already out, so I mean, I'm hoping I do like it and then can jump right into the series. But basically, all I really know about this book is that it's sort of a Mulan-esque kind of retelling, but it takes place in I think it's a Moroccan-inspired world. So we have a main character who's this young girl who basically, whatever's happening in the world, to kind of deal with it, she has to like dress up as a man, and yeah, that's pretty much the basic premise that I know of the story. I'm super excited about reading kind of the Moroccan inspired setting, mythology, whatever is in that book. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to that one. So the next challenge is to read a book by an Asian author in your favorite genre. So my favorite genre, I have a few, but I chose kind of to go with fantasy for this one, and a lot of my reads anyways are fantasy. Like We Hunt the Flame is a fantasy book, but for this challenge I did want to do like a different book, so I'm decided to read These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. This is another book that is just super hyped and I've heard so many great things about. It is a Romeo and Juliet retelling, but it takes place in Shanghai. So we have obviously like Asian main characters and a really cool different take on a classic story. So I'm really looking forward to this one. I've heard actually that even though it's obviously like a Romeo and Juliet retelling, it's not as romance heavy, and that honestly works for me. I don't love romance as like a main plot point usually in stories. I do like it more when there's like other things going on, so I'm hoping that that means great things for this book. So the next challenge is to read a nonfiction book by an Asian author, and this was kind of difficult for me as a challenge. I don't really read a lot of nonfiction, and I kind of did some research to see what stories were out there and what I was actually interested in, but I came across this book called The Elephant Chaser's Daughter by Shilpa Raj, and this is a memoir of Shilpa Raj's life in India, and she basically talks about her dealing with her family's kind of gender discrimination, as she was like born as a girl and her family wanted a boy. And if you know anything about kind of Indian society, especially back in the day, women and girls aren't given a lot of kind of value. And so Shilpa talks about in her memoir a lot of just kind of gender discrimination, class discrimination, dealing with her family and growing up with this kind of mentality. A lot of great things about this book, and I am definitely hoping to get to this one. And then the last challenge is to read a book by an Asian author that is not US centric, so the setting is not in the US. I'm also throwing in Canada because I'm from Canada, so this is basically just a book that does not take place in North America. So for this challenge, I chose Love from A to Z by S.K. Ali. So this book is, I've heard so many great things about this book, and especially for like the Muslim representation. And a lot of times I do find when I read books, even Own Voices books about like Muslims and Muslim life in America, you always get this very kind of one-dimensional view of what it means to be Muslim. So a lot of times you have kind of young kids who are kind of rebelling against their religion, and you know, Islam and like being a Muslim is given a really, like, seen in a really negative light. And I've heard that this book does a really beautiful job of showing kind of the beauty of that religion, and yeah, just dealing with a young Muslim American's journey. So this also is a bit of a cheat book because I think it does start or have to do with like a Muslim American, but the book does take place in Doha, Qatar. So we're gonna use it for this challenge, and hopefully it works. But all I really know about this book is that it is about a young Muslim girl who has been dealing with like a lot of Islamophobia and kind of hatred and discrimination. So I think for like the summer she goes to Doha to live with her like grandparents or something, where she meets like a nice young guy who's also a Muslim, and yeah, it's a bit of a romance, and also deals with a lot of kind of contemporary issues that a lot of Muslims face. And like I said, I just have heard so many great things about the representation in this book, so I definitely want to read it and see for myself. So yeah, those are the books I'm trying to hopefully read in May. I have not been doing a great job about reading the books that I have on my TBR, but I'm trying to get better at that and actually focus on these books. And definitely this month I do want to try to read the books that I've chosen for myself, so we'll see how that goes. But anyways guys, thanks for checking out this video, and see you guys next time.